In order to even try to do that, we would have to sanction, for example, some of the world's largest banks. We'd have to cut off countries like China from the American financial system. And since they happen to be major purchasers of our debt, such actions could trigger severe disruptions in our own economy.
And they will not join us if we're demanding even greater sacrifices and threatening their businesses and banks.
And, by the way, raise questions internationally about the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency.
For the American dollar to cease to be the reserve currency of the world, which is already bubbling out there.
If, in fact, we rejected this deal, we would be putting Iran in the driver's seat. I think the sanctions would begin to dissolve. They would not be as effective. So ironically, Iran would get some of that $56 billion back anyway, and their economy would begin to improve anyway.
We are in a place that some people thought was unimaginable and others unacceptable. You remember the debate over how much money Iran was going to get? Sometimes you hear some of the presidential candidates putting a mistaken figure out of 155 billion. We never thought it'd be that. Others thought it would be about 100 billion because there was supposedly 100 billion that was owed and so forth. We calculated it to be about $55 billion when you really take a hard look at the economy and what is happening. Guess what, folks? You know how much they have received to date? As I stand here tonight, about $3 billion.
Election rolled around. The outcome offered a glimmer of hope. Iranians elected Hassan Rouhani. It finally appeared as if President Obama might have an Iranian leader with whom he could negotiate. The P5+1 in the European Union agreed to lift, which in English means suspend, in Iranian terms means end, which is why we use the word lift. One of the things one does in diplomacy, language matters.
Speaks perfect English, and he and I wrote a report together in 2005 in which shamed him with the perfection of his English language.
But to lift sanctions that applied in the nuclear realm, but not sanctions in countering terrorism, not sanctions about human rights abuses, not sanctions about proliferation, not sanctions about weapons transfer.
What will happen more likely is we're going to all agree they're in violation. And a country that has destroyed 2/3 of its centrifuges, knocked out its stockpile, destroyed its electrical and piping, that has sanctions relief. Are you telling me?
I certainly am pleasantly surprised that the Iranians have agreed to so much here in terms of the inspection regime, the reduction as far as the centrifuges, the stockpile, what they're doing with the Iraq reactor. All of that, I think, is really quite surprising and quite good.
Working in Iran using modern technologies such as real-time enrichment monitoring, high-tech electronic seals, and cameras that are always watching 24/7, 365.
Well, first of all, I should say, things like the additional protocol, things like using these advanced technologies for IAEA inspections, these are things that we want to see much more broadly in terms of the IAEA's activities. And those kinds of technologies are things that our national laboratories develop.
Are they acceptable to the Iranians?
Yes.
They are?
Yes. We have discussed that. Yep.
The other piece that's out there is, again, the inspectors. We need to recognize if Iran withdraws from the NPT, the IAEA is gone. For an Israeli strike, for an American strike, 90 to 95% of the intelligence for that strike is going to come from the IAEA. Those inspectors are absolutely, without question, the best source of information as to what the Iranian program is, where it is, what it is doing, everything else.
The person sitting in my seat, the President of the United States, Republican or Democrat,
that are required,
is not only going to have the same capacity to take necessary military actions or to impose new sanctions, but is actually going to have more insight in the program and will be better positioned and will have international legitimacy if they have to deal with a violation of the program.
Here's the key thing. The military option would remain on the table, but the fact is that military option would be enhanced because we'd been spending the intervening number of years gathering significantly more detail about Iran's nuclear program. So when it comes to the targeting decisions that would be made by military officials either in Israel or the United States, those targets